Everybody, welcome to the final hours of the 2010s. How's it going?
Less than 5 hours left, at least Pacific time.
Well, that's a good way to play it off. Yeah, 3 hours left here.
Yep, we're gonna do a brief 2010s rewind, and by brief I mean it's not going to be short, but as Filthy and I were discussing before the stream, what we've found is that everything is kind of connected together in a somewhat abstract but simultaneously very tangible kind of way.
What inspired this is that I was on the voice chat of SO's server the other day, and someone asked me what I thought the defining moment of the 2010s is. So that would be 2010 to 2019. And I thought about it for a bit, and for some reason it kept coming back to the 2008 financial crisis. Now, I might be a little biased because I made the 2008 financial crisis video, which is really great, and you all definitely should watch it if you haven't already.
It really is.
Thank you. But yes, the 2010s is largely defined by an event that took place before the 2010s. And the reason for this is because of, well, if you're at least familiar with my content, especially my older content, then you know about the fourth turning and the seculums. The way it works is that there is a repeating cycle in history that is observable of a crisis happening basically every 80 years. And we're at that crisis phase. However, every turning, of which there are 4 every 80 years, is initiated by some spark of history, some defining event, usually, that marks a transition from, say, a first turning to a second turning. In this case, the 2008 financial crisis marked a transitory state between the third turning of the 90s and the early 00s into the fourth turning, which is 2008 onwards into the current decade. And I think everything that's been happening in the last decade or so can be best defined and best explained by, well, the fourth turning.
Yeah, and I would say we're well past the point where there's unease. I'd say the point of unease would have been the 2008 financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've always, like, you and I have had a couple clashes previously about the four turnings, mainly because I misunderstood sort of how the explanation of the four turnings worked, or how it was explained. It's not historical determinism, it's just that society as it exists now and the sort of parameters created for society by the state and by the concept of political rule is going to limit the possible outcomes of social interaction. And as we've sort of gone over, states are unsustainable, and they're unsustainable because of how states inherently have to function. And I've gone over that in extensive detail in the past. So that's not really a deterministic perspective to say that states are eventually going to collapse and there are eventually going to be disasters at points within history in every state society. But given that, that's really what I think fourth turn the turnings are. It's points of financial development within the history of state societies.
Now, we did get a super chat from Pumpkin Row who says that he ships me and you together.
I don't have an objection to that. If it's just our avatars, fine.
I mean, I can't stop people from writing fan fiction, though you'll have to label it as AU. But anyways,
I think before I clarified, I was just talking about our avatars. That
Yeah.
alone, it's funny. It's just this stream, but that very easily could qualify as a candidate for the most awkward moment of the 2010s.
Possibly, I'm not. It could be any number of things. Yeah, probably.
I was talking about explaining the four turnings, and that was always my objection to it, is I didn't really understand it, because, to be fair, it was just sort of presented as if the four turnings, or the Strauss-Howe generational theory, it's just kind of an axiom in and of itself, but there was nothing really explaining the foundation of that axiom. So I didn't understand it, but I came to sort of, I learned things later on, which kind of showed me, oh, well, it's true, it's just there's needs to be some foundation set in place in order for most people to begin to approach it as anything more than just sort of conventional wisdom.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, the four turnings are not historicism. They're not a guarantee. It's just an observation and people applying to incentives that exist structurally, be easily observed in the 2010s. I mean, just a perfect example is that very early on in the decade, 2011, 2012, if I recall correctly, you had Edward Snowden coming out talking about all of the government surveillance programs and basically confirming a lot of the so-called conspiracy theories that people had about government surveillance, government manipulation of data.
Yeah, revealing PRISM.
Yeah.
Well, that's something that you hear about PRISM quite a bit. You hear that it was just pertaining to NSA surveillance, but what you don't hear are the aspects of PRISM which go into extensive detail about how the government was able to manipulate media narratives covertly.
Mm-hmm. And you can also see that with Operation Mockingbird and Operation Choke Point, which is a direct attempt to, well, coerce people through their finances.
Is that rather ironically how PRISM was covered in the media is ironically a great example of how the state will actually try and control narratives. Forcibly suppressing content, that's not how the state approaches this. They understand full well that by doing that, it draws more attention to whatever they were trying to suppress. As a matter of fact, the state does that nowadays. They'll shut down certain content, like Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro. They'll censor them to give people the impression, to try and lead them to believe that that is content which the state is trying to suppress because it is harmful to the status quo. The state and these cartels and these firms the state operate through, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars annually on marketing research. They know exactly what they're doing. On top of that, we've seen the state has actually used this very tactic as a psychological operation on record before. So, I mean, just the fact, the idea that, oh, the state wouldn't suppress content that, the state likes or the state approves of. I mean, you really have to step back and question whether or not, that's actually just an uncontroversial opinion that you found based upon your own reasoning, or you came to that conclusion through critical thinking. Or was it something that was planted uncritically into your thought process? Was it something you were led to because some news anchor said it, and you didn't really give it any second thoughts? Was completely omitted. So now people don't even realize the full extent to what was revealed in the Snowden links, because they leaks, I mean, because they only focused on a very small aspect of it, and an aspect of it which everyone already kind of knew in the first place. So they were basically able to sort of confine what people were talking about and what people were focusing on by themselves co-opting the leak.
What you're saying is that the TSA is of no consequence in protecting people?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it seems that way.
That's so weird. It's not like it's security theater or anything like that. They couldn't just be putting on a show for their benefit and to propagandize to us, could they?
It's not like planes existed for almost 100 years prior to 9/11. And it was, I mean, life has largely not been that much different since 9/11, at least air travel hasn't, except, of course, for the fact that it's much more expensive to fly because of the TSA.
It's freaking, I actually don't remember that bit about the $300 tickets being cheaper.
Well, that wasn't covered by the media. That was just something which I noticed when I was shopping around for the prices of flight.
It's kind of weird because we're in a position where there's a lot to go over an entire decade, but you're also kind of paralyzed with, like, what do you talk about?
Well, I kind of already brought it up, but the culture war.
That's kind of been ongoing for as long as I can remember, actually.
Well, that's sort of an elephant in the room for sure, because that's what a lot of people are talking about. But this is something which I've noticed very recently, and we were talking about this before stream. I was going to actually make like a video compilation of this based on old archival footage that I've been able to find of media broadcasts going back to the 1950s. But what I've found is that at any given time, there are only 3 narratives. It's the three exact same narratives in American politics. But they just change around the figures and the subject of interest or the groups that they're talking about. But it's always the same 3 narratives. Either the president is doing something worthy of being impeached or should be impeached, and the other side is saying, well, look at these guys trying to get rid of this president. How undemocratic of them. There's of course the culture war aspect. There's one group of political insurgents, and who that group is determined by the outlet which is advertising to your particular political allegiance. And then there's the status quo, which needs to be maintained because the status quo is good.
The status quo is God.
Right, and the other one that I noticed out of these narratives was... Hold on just a moment. I had these written down, and that's what I forgot the fucking third one.
Alright. But I think it's interesting we can go into the culture war, because that's actually a pretty significant thing that happened in this decade as well. I'm sure we all remember...
terrorism. Terrorism was the third one. There's always a looming national security threat, which the government needs to take care of. That's the third narrative.
It's kind of been their playbook since the New Deal, that there's always this great external threat that always needs to be taken care of, that we need to be protected from. Largely because that in the 1930s and 1940s, they had, like, you can even find stuff about them talking about this, how members of the Roosevelt regime, they wanted a war economy. They wanted a war because they wanted to be able to control people. They wanted to be able to socially engineer society. However, they understood that if there was no great external threat which people could rally against, then they couldn't possibly justify the kind of central planning that they wanted. So it makes sense for them to have some great external threat, whether it be Palestinian terrorism, the IRA, Taliban, take your pick. There's always going to be something that's always going to be a threat to the U.S. and its interests. And this even goes before the 1930s, I just remembered, because, like, what is it? The U.S. has been at war for all but a few years of its existence.
Yeah, I can't remember when it wasn't.
Yeah, and I remember there's like a website that keeps track of when the U.S., like the years the U.S. has been at war and what conflicts the U.S. was embroiled in during those years. And there's only like a handful of them where the U.S. was actually at peace. Suffice to say that, yeah, the U.S., very like any totalitarian dictatorship, the United States definitely relies on some great external existential threat in order to justify its regime. Even if there's peacetime, people are going to start to realize that it's the government that's acting against their interest, as it's the only malefactor that they can conceive of in their lives. In the absence of this, well, if people realize this, then they'll be more inclined to engage in subversive action, whether that be protest, revolution, armed insurrection, or just simple counter-economics.
Well, people aren't motivated to subvert the system if they've internalized the system as being something which functions ultimately in their interests. There's this hilarious article which is talking about crypto anarchists, and it's like people trading Bitcoin, people talking in private encrypted chats, and the headline of the article is, hold on, let me
I found it.
Yeah.
The web is a terrorist's command and control network of choice. I'm gonna post a link to it.
They couldn't use more spooky language if they tried.
I posted a link to it in chat, so if you guys want to check it out for yourself, it's there.
I was just a boy when the infidels came to my village in their Black Hawk helicopters. The statists fired at the oil fields, and they lit up like the eyes of Allah. Burning oil rained down from the sky and cooked everything it touched. I could only hide myself and cry as my bitcoins were consumed by the fiery black liquid death. In the midst of the chaos, I could swear I heard my crypto screaming for help. As quickly as they'd come, the statists were gone. It was the day I put a jihad on them. And if you don't believe it, then you'd better kill me now, because I'll put a jihad on you too.
Oh, that is perfect. Did you just come up with that now?
No, I fucking read that directly from the script of Team America. I just replaced some of the words with reference to libertarianism. But yeah,
back to the culture war.
Shut up, statist infidel. But just what I was gonna. Oh my god, chat's popping off right now. They must have loved that.
But less of it. And Pumpkin Row just sent a super chat for $2, asking you to say that again, but in the Batman voice.
I don't have a fucking Batman. A lot of people are scared of this, but I mean, aside from the fact we already kind of brought up where throughout the 2020s, the counter economy, as soon as the political economy does collapse, which it's looking like it's eventually going to, we're not going to be doomed with one of those two legitimacy tools. Like, it's not going to be an ethno-nationalist or a Marxist order, because there's not going to be another state. That's the first thing. But the only thing I can really see in conclusion here is that it's a good thing for libertarians. And why I say it's a good thing for libertarians is I think that the state overlooked this, but they forgot that the main thing which was holding libertarians back was them, through the media, trying to marry libertarianism with conservatism. And now that mainstream conservatism is going in this sort of neo-reactionary direction, now libertarianism is not married to conservatism, which means libertarianism can reach its full power level. I'd say since like 2016, this has become sort of increasingly noticeable. But every year, something that I've noticed is that, like, when you're buying food from the grocery store or just anything where the main utility of it is in the quantity of units per purchase, what I've noticed is that it's costing more, and what is actually in each unit is significantly less. And that is, I'd say there are a lot of factors for that. Increasing minimum wage, the increasing barrier of entry for most markets because of the regulation, so limiting competition. Not just competition, but limiting the people that are actually able to produce commodities, and therefore resulting in less commodities being produced and less resources available as a result. But ultimately, the main reason for this is banking, and fractional reserve banking specifically, and the increasing debt. There's this impression that there's a greater amount of wealth that exists, so people are operating around that, but there just aren't that many resources. So in trying to allocate, these resources to match sort of what is expected of them according to their stock figures, they sort of half-ass it. Like they I don't know, like just take in, for example, a bag of chips. They'll fill the bag half full, half of it's air, half of it's chips, to give the impression that to their stockholders that they're selling the same thing.
Very much so. Now, one thing I definitely wanted to talk about, and we were talking about this just before the stream, is we were going to get into the entertainment of the 2010s and basically how that defines the decade. You can see this largely throughout history. It's not a fourth turning thing. It's something that's been observed independent of it.
It's Scrollax, Niger.
What?
Which, by the way, we were the ones, Filthy and I, it was actually earlier this year, we were the ones who pointed out that the government was radicalizing people to try and get them to do mass shootings through image boards. And that turned into the truth about the Christchurch shooting meme. So, yeah, I'm, an apology would be nice, but I'm not expecting one. I mean, if we were really to go on about it, I'm not too pissed off about it, like just the meme in general, but yeah, I would like it to be at least acknowledged that we were 100% fucking right about everything we said in that video. A lot of what I've been seeing, the neo-Marxists talking about it or whatever, is just, that's tinfoil hat shit. Well, I mean, it's provably true now, so, when you're going to apologize, I'll be, my DMs are open.
Yay.
Rest in peace, Seth Rich, who committed suicide by shooting himself in the back of the head twice.